today we're so excited and thrilled really to be joined by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Dionne Searcey to discuss her book, In Pursuit of Disobedient Women. I really enjoyed this book. Thank you so much, Dionne, for being with us and for writing this important book. Dionne was the West Africa Bureau Chief for the New York Times from 2015 to 2019, and currently is a climate reporter for the Times. She was part of a team that won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting. She joined the Times in 2014 to write about the American economy after working for 10 years at the Wall Street Journal, where she was an investigative reporter and national legal correspondent and covered the telecom industry. She worked as a political reporter at Newsday and the Seattle Times and was even a reporting resident at the Chicago Tribune. She started her career as a crime reporter at the City News Bureau of Chicago. She was raised in Wymore, Nebraska, and lives with her husband and 3 children in Brooklyn, New York. So today's event will begin with a moderated discussion. Afterwards, we'll have question and answers where you can ask questions directly to Dionne and Sonya. If questions come up during the moderated discussion, you can just add them into the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we have time for, really. If you haven't already purchased the book, you can buy the paperback book from Women and Children First bookstore online and get a 10% discount using the code Women's Global. Now it is my great honor to introduce to you our moderator for today's conversation, longtime WGEP advocate and my friend, Dr. Sonya Anderson. Sonya is the president of Thrive Chicago, a collective impact organization that leverages the power of people, systems, and data to accelerate innovation and opportunity for Chicago youth. She began her career as a high school teacher as part of the Mississippi Teacher Corps and went on to the Ford Foundation, the Oprah Winfrey Foundation, amassing decades of experience in education, grant making, and policy reform. In addition to her role at Thrive Chicago, Sonya is the founder of Embark Strategies, a boutique consulting firm that provides thought partnership and technical support to philanthropy and nonprofit sector in their efforts to plan, design, and implement their organizations. Sonya holds an undergraduate degree in economics and political science from Yale University, a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Ghana, and a doctorate in education planning and policy from Harvard University. Thank you so much, Sonya, for being here. So with that, I want to turn it over, pass it over to Sonya and Dionne for our discussion. I'm so excited to have you both.
Thank you, Amy. First, let me just start off by saying, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this decades of experience reference. I really want to lean into this notion that I'm a child prodigy and I just did a whole lot in like 10 years, a decade of experience. So to hear that read back at me was like, huh, I guess it's technically true, but I'm going to resist that. Thank you so much, Amy, and Women's Global Education for this opportunity. I'm super excited to be in conversation with Dionne this morning or afternoon or whatever time of day it is, wherever it is that you are. And I do want to actually start off by saying it was such a delight to read this book. I spent more than a few years in various parts of West Africa. As you heard Amy just share, I did a master's at the University of Ghana many years ago and worked in girls' education and gender equity for a number of years throughout West and Southern Africa. And so much of the picture that you painted was so evocative, provocative, but also evocative. And it just took me back to some really, really lovely memories. And I will have to say, I mean, Kenyan coffee is wonderful and all, but some Nescafe and condensed milk by the side of the road, there is nothing like it.
Yep,
So
that's exactly right. Thank you so much. It's nice of you to say, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I want to begin at the beginning, which is with the title of this book. So, as I've talked about this with various friends in my life, and I've shared the title, people are immediately captivated by this notion of disobedient women. I love it. But you also say the subtitle is a memoir of love, rebellion, and family far away. And it struck me that that subtitle in particular, those terms can operate so synergistically. Each one of those can stand on their own, on its own, but they can also interact synergistically. And I'd love to just actually hear your reflections about the title itself and how you've thought about love, rebellion, family, and being far away coming together as you both moved through the experience, but also as you reflected on the experience in the writing of the book.
Well, that's a big question. So I guess what I could tell you is that, for me, the book, what I was looking to do with the book is to find a way to talk about these incredible women that I met and thread them together. And it seemed like telling my own story was the easiest narrative vehicle, so some of this came down to logistics, I guess, of writing. But in the societies that I was working in West and Central Africa, it felt like to me that women were absent in circles of power in all ways, in government circles for the most part, in boardrooms, in families. Women were not the decision makers. And so when you overlay that context into, the society, I guess, in every level of society, women were pretty much absent. And I just felt like there had to be a way to talk about the heroics of what some of these women had done, even simple heroics, a woman who, let alone refuses to carry a suicide bomb and blow herself up. But a woman CEO, she had climbed these levels, to the Wall Street of Nigeria. And just what did she have to face? And this simple thing, like, I'm not going to tell my husband my salary. That was to me, this really interesting weapon, I guess, and power that she held in the way that she was successful. And I can't compare myself at all in any way, shape, or form to any of these women, but I had been writing about the American economy and how women were operating in America, and how women had been dropping out of the workforce. And this is pre-pandemic. I can't. The situation is so much different now, but even before then, women had been dropping out of the workforce to care for their family, to care for, elderly people, and women breadwinners. There's still a lot of tension in families when that happens, and how society views that, which feels like we should be beyond that by now. But this to me just felt like a way to discuss kind of everything. So a little kitchen sink-ish, I guess, but yeah.
I love it. Thank you. Well, your comments really make me think. We're talking about some of the decisions that women have to make when they are actually out in the world. They're in the workforce. They're doing those things. But I'd love to just back it up a tiny bit, because one of the things I was so struck by is the number of examples that you gave around the kind of innovation and ingenuity and entrepreneurship, both formal and informal, that folks had to display over and over again, anywhere from the money changers in Sierra Leone who swapped out the old bills for the new bills, to stories of Aisha, right? And the choices that she had to make in terms of her marriage, and the kinds of the security and protections that it afforded her amidst a set of very horrible circumstances, right? And so I was curious how you think about this notion of how women in particular have to find, create, carve out, pick your verb, right? These opportunities for entrepreneurship, these opportunities for autonomy, these opportunities for, self-sustaining lives, and what that makes you think in terms of what these women are bringing to the table, but also, what it means for all of us who care about women and women's well-being in these spaces.
Well, I think it's, it's kind of depressing, I guess. If you look at, I've been thinking a lot about mental energy that we talk about that women in America spend, right? As wives and mothers, just making dentist appointments and doing, planning a birthday party and these kinds of things that even if you have an equal relationship with your husband or partner, this is something that falls on generally one person and feels a little unfair. And then you take it to this whole other level in a place where women, one woman I wrote about, how she was expected when her husband well, I wrote about her later. She was expected when her husband went away and migrated to Europe. She was expected to just rely on handouts until he found a job. It's a story I wrote about more recently. And, you know, when you look at situations like that, and she's like, no, I'm going to work. And then the whole community turned on her. And, you know, it's just pretty incredible what women have to go through and what women, you know, how creative, I guess, they can be. I mean, and that creativity comes in so many levels. It can be as basic as divorcing your husband, like Zalika did, who I wrote about. And, you know, she wanted love. Is that too much, you know, in the world to marry for love? And that just was something that hadn't been afforded to her. And fortunately, you know, I think one thing that I really loved about Zalika's story is it was a man who helped her, an imam, a judge who was helping women get divorces when they were unhappy, mistreated, or when they weren't, you know, in love. And a lot of times, you know, it takes male allies, I guess, to help us through these situations. But a lot of it is just force of, you know, creativity, like you say, and will, and finding a way to meander through these little spaces that there are openings. And I really felt like it was important to tell sort of that first draft of history kind of way, and to mesh all these stories together to see like what was happening in different regions, and how, you know, the internet had influenced that, how radio, how even urbanization, just the fact that more people are going to cities is really changing things. I had someone say to me once, you know, people who live out in the boonies in, you know, XYZ country, they may never have been to a city, but today they know someone who's been to a city. I do think that, you know, you visit places that are pretty far removed, and the first thing you notice is no government services. They've just been completely abandoned. You know, that's everywhere from the Central African Republic, where, you know, the president, they call the president the mayor of Bangui, because he's really only has control of the capital. And there's, you know, warlords and bad things that are happening out, you know, in the hinterlands. But you see that in Nigeria. I mean, this lack of, you know, social services, lack of everything in Maiduguri, which is the home of Boko Haram. And really, you know, that stems from corruption and neglect. Like a lot of terrorist organizations begin, just like, you know, bad things, crime and stuff in America happens in similar ways. And I think that it's so important for someone to be paying attention out there, whether it's an NGO or, well, I mean, in many cases an NGO, because they're substituting for government services there. I was recently in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I took this 500-mile trip down the river, the Congo River, to look at logging, because I write about climate change now. And I stopped in a community called Loaka, and they're like, we want you to see the school. And it was a riverside community that floods during the rainy season, and all the school was built on stilts. It was 500 kids in 2 classrooms, and I clambered up the ladder, and there were holes in the floor of the classroom because the wood had rotted. And I asked the kids, they wanted me to ask the kids questions, and I never really knew, you know, whenever I get thrust into these situations, it's like, oh, I have one shot. What am I going to say to, you know, this room full of blinking eyes? And I said, so what is your hope for the community? And one kid stood up and he said, we would really like some backpacks. And just this very simple thing. And I'm thinking in my head, how in the world could I ever facilitate? I mean, I'm a journalist, not an aid worker, but how could I ever facilitate any kind of backpacks? I mean, this is like a community that's completely off the grid. There's no electricity. You only get there by boat. There's no NGO at all. I wrote a friend at UNICEF. She's like, yeah, no, there's nobody out there. And it's like that simple thing. And how do you solve this? I don't know, but that's why it's important that there are groups, you know, in these places that are forgotten that can help this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. During my very first trip to Africa a million years ago, this was in Ghana, and when I would spend time in the rural areas, I would often think about, and there's a reference in the book to this, but often think about just flip-flops, right? And how so many kids were running around barefoot, and all the potential health hazards that presented for them. And I thought, literally something as basic as a flip-flop, which is, you know, about as fundamental in some respects as you
Yeah.
can get, right? Could then lead to so many, the eradication of so many other things, particularly in the areas of health. I'm also struck, you talk, even just now, you referenced your own personal experience coming from a rural part of the United States. I'm also from the Deep South, so I understand people coming from the big city and what that means.
Yeah.
You talk a lot too, though, about your faith background. Right. And I'm curious how you were very thoughtful and reflective in sharing that throughout the book. And I'm curious how your own understanding of how religion has shaped some of the forces and some of the areas that you were reporting in and that you spend a lot of time in both ways that are for good and perhaps for ill. And I'd love to hear you sort of reflect on that out loud a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I think that fundamentalism in general in America has caused a lot of problems, and in West Africa has caused a lot of problems. In America, I think it's a little obvious some of the issues that we have there, but in West Africa, Islamic fundamentalism has led to interpretations of things that have led to violence, and just like in other parts of the world, that's not the only thing going on. Like I said, I think a lot of that is masked over by government neglect and straight out corruption that has led to all these problems. But at the same time, there were some really beautiful ways that Islam and other religions were playing out. I mean, Nigeria it's divided, but in the South, it's religion-wise, it's largely Islamic in the north and Christian in the south. And there are these beautiful, beautiful, giant, mega churches in southern Nigeria that are a huge, huge part of people's lives. I mean, very much in the way that it was for me growing up. And in Dakar, they practice Sufism, that kind of Islam, and I call it like hippie Islam. Basically, it reminded me of my husband's Unitarian background growing up. It's just very peace and love, and they have a lot of, you can have alcohol there, but not many people drink in Dakar. And there are these great discos that stay open until 4 or 5 in the morning. And everybody's just pumped up on juice, dancing to OJ and mango juice and stuff. And I just think there's so many, like everywhere, there's so many beautiful ways that religion plays out in people's lives and is a huge part. And it can also be used for bad, but generally, in America, I think sometimes fundamentalist Christianity is layered also by, the economy, there's just so many forces that we blame on religion that don't really end up being like that as the exact cause.
Yeah, let's just stay here for a moment if we could, since since I'm getting all in your business about your religious views and where you're from.
Right.
Let's talk about family for just a second. And particularly at the beginning of the book, you talk a lot about the transition, right, of your family from Brooklyn to West Africa. And I was, as a mom myself, I was particularly struck about, what about the kids, right?
Yeah.
And you talk a lot at the beginning about this really stark juxtaposition of what their lives were like in the U.S. And then what their lives were like once you all moved, and the poverty, right? And the very sort of explicit poverty and having to come to terms with your own privilege in a new context that was quite different from the privilege that you may or may not have experienced when you were in the US. How do you help your children navigate that and really understand it as Americans, as presumably white Americans, as expats, all of that rolled up into one?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I, early on kind of just browbeat them about it. Like, look at this, look at how much you have, and that doesn't work like you might imagine. So, but, I think that for me, it was so important to show them that African countries were a place different than what they saw portrayed in movies. I mean, they were pretty young, but they'd still seen like Mean Girls, where, the main character is from, they don't even say what country she's from. She's just from Africa. And it's just ridiculous, right? And they show lions when they refer to her time in Africa or whatever. And I feel like Hollywood, these like major media kind of stereotypes, when they look at the African continent, you hear about famine or disease or war or wild animals. And that's not what it's about. And for me, I wanted the kids to, live in a new place and experience a new culture, but know about this place where people are people. And, this is just another country in the world. And here's how things work here. And it's different from what you know. And, there's poverty here, but let's think about, let's break that down. Do people have enough to eat? Do people have shelter? Do they, how do you break down what is poverty and what isn't? And we just had a lot of long, thoughtful discussions about that. And, I feel like, I get a lot of, my kids are teenagers now, and I get a lot of eye rolling, like, I know we're privileged, and it's just like, yeah, you are. And so, we when we're having discussions, but I do think that they've internalized that at least a little bit. And I don't know how to ever make it, a perfect situation, but at least they get that. And I also know, like, my son came up to me the other day and he's like, Mom, you would always say that people have these stupid stereotypes about Africa, and that even, really smart people do. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I just can't believe the number of people who I think are like teachers, or people who I think are really, really smart and leaders in the school or wherever, who say the stupidest things, like, cliches about the continent or people. And like, yeah, so I'm really happy that they can see that. And at least that has helped them a little bit. So yeah, and for me, like in my work, what I tried to do for sure was write about things that are not stereotypes, like poetry and book clubs and paintings and painters from Africa, things that we don't think about when we think about. I reviewed a restaurant once. I mean, how many times, do you read a restaurant review out of Nigeria? So that was helpful.
Do your kids have a favorite memory from their time?
They have many favorite memories. They really like it. I just went back to Dakar for an art biennale, actually, and a big party. The painter who painted Obama's portrait, Kehinde Wiley, had a big, huge opening party and a bunch of artists and that kind of thing. So I went back to look at art, and my kids were so jealous and telling me, like, here's what they wanted me to do, in their stead and that kind of thing. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the paper for just a moment. Again, I was struck so many times by the way that you had to navigate sort of the ethics of journalism, right? And everything from trying to find the story that was, quite frankly, awful enough, right, to rise to the level of getting anyone's attention, to whether or not to pay informants, to whether or not to give a bag of rice or leave that for the aid community, all in the service of both trying to get the story told with integrity, right, in a way that was compelling, but also to get the story seen and heard. So trying to get it to the front page, that whole above the fold thing. I'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on what was the push-pull in that, and how do you as a journalist think about navigating that line between compelling and forceful and in your face, but not exploitative or stereotypical or all of those other things? How do you do that?
Well, I think, that's a huge question, and it's always on people's mind. I think in any war reporting, I mean, to be frank, we're probably at that stage in the Ukraine war too. I'm sure those reporters there are thinking, like, how do I keep this, on the front page without just being like, here's a story about somebody else who died in a really awful way. It's just part of human nature to get tired of, I guess, war coverage or reading the paper about certain subjects. But for me, what I thought was really interesting was exploring the gray areas. That's one thing that I really tried to exploit, like and cutting through stereotypes. Like, we know this stereotype, like for a while, everybody thought women were vicious suicide bombers in Nigeria. And so it just struck me as something is off by that. So some of it is going with your gut and then getting at the heart of, like, who are these women? What's happening here? And so I found some women who had been detained. They were failed suicide bombers, the government considered them. And then just delving in and talking to them and what was happening, and realizing that they were recruits. And in fact, they were heroes, not, who had cleverly found ways to navigate this situation and get out of killing people. But I think, Yeah, there is always this, when you're the only one on the ground covering something, and especially in a situation like a war with Boko Haram, for instance, which is where I spent a lot of time. Like, there aren't a lot of reporters there. I mean, in Ukraine, there are a million reporters right now from all kinds of organizations. Like, I was usually the only journalist, in Maiduguri who would turn up, who was from abroad. Usually, not always, but sometimes. And I think that foreign reporting, can bring a level of attention, like just having the New York Times name attached to you. I would explain to people, like, I want you to know when you talk to me, like, so know if you're giving me your name, presidents read the New York Times, not just my president, but maybe your president too. And, I have this, and people understood that, and they wanted, presidents to know what they were feeling, what their situation was. But it's, this constant tug of, like you say, like, really trying not to exploit people's situations. I mean, I worked with a photographer called Ashley Gilbertson, and one really important lesson that he taught me is, he used to say, I will never photograph a kid in a dump. I mean, there are a lot of garbage pickers who make a living in West Africa, just going through old trash. And he's like, you take the person out of that situation and give them dignity. If you're going to photograph them, shoot a portrait of them. Don't do that. And I try to apply that to my reporting, like, people living in hard situations, like, take them out of that situation and talk to them and write about their lives in other manners, so that that's not their whole identity. So that was part of it.
Thank you for that. I know we're just about at time to open it up to Q&A. I want to ask one more question to sort of start the segue into the conversation that Women's Global really focuses on, which is on education. So in one of the very final chapters of the book, you recount a conversation with your colleague, Shehu, where you remarked to him that the women who survived Boko Haram deserve medals. And then he replied, what they need are scholarships. And I'm just curious, and you referenced schools a moment ago, right? Mm-hmm. I'm just curious how you think about the role of scholarships and access to education in shaping the lives of so many of the women that you encountered and their children, and particularly their daughters.
Well, I think, in many ways, it's like it is in America, like the key to everything, really. And it's just the key to getting, like, one rung up on the economic ladder, I think, in many circumstances. And just like here, it gives kids something to do also, and keeps them off the streets and keeps them out of trouble, right? There's that. But also, it can give them an opportunity as a starter job. It can give them, for Balaraba, who's one suicide bomber recruit that I wrote about extensively, education has meant that she has gone to nursing school. I keep in touch with her pretty regularly, and she passes, she contacts me when she graduates from every level of nursing school. So she's working her way up right now. And she can operate in a way that not only gives her dignity and helps her give back, because part of it for her is giving back to the people who helped her when she was badly burned in a Boko Haram incident, but it also gives her extra income. I mean, she was selling soda out of a little mini refrigerator for a while. That's what she was doing, is selling cold drinks. And now she can be a nurse and help people, and have a regular paycheck for her child to pay school fees for her daughter. And for girls, I mean, it makes all the difference, because, like, as we started this conversation, society is so skewed in favor of men, and so it provides all kinds of pathways for them. So I think it's what anybody wants. I mean, anytime you talk to people, they really understand the importance of education.
Thank you, Dionne. That's a great note to press pause on.
Damaris is one of WGEP's board members, is currently calling in from Sierra Leone. In her full-time role is the Global Senior Management Accountant at Purposeful. So go ahead, Damaris, and I will spotlight you as soon as you're talking. Spotlight here.
Okay. Thank you so much, Harriet. And thank you, Sonya and Dionne, for that fantastic conversation. My name is Damaris. As Harriet has already said, I have a very nasty flu, so excuse the rustiness of my voice. I live in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm currently in Sierra Leone, which is where I work. For context, Nairobi, Kenya is in the east side of Africa, and Sierra Leone is on the west. It's 9 hours difference. So as Sonya and Dionne were discussing earlier, that Africa is not a country, it's a whole continent. So there's like a whole 9 hours between Sierra Leone and Kenya. It's been a very interesting conversation, and it definitely resonates with the work that we do at WGEP. I particularly like the statement that is in Dionne's book that says, what women want is a scholarship, is not an award. And that is what we try to do at WGEP. In one of our programs, which is the Sisters Lead, which is a leadership training and development program that we want to highlight in relations to Dionne's memoir. We support girls to succeed in school and to be empowered with leadership skills to actively participate in their communities and achieve their dreams. Like Dionne discussed in her book, the young women in our programs and their male allies are bravely working to promote gender equality and create change in their communities, in the issues that they care about. So personally, I am very excited about the work that WGP does, and that is why I'm excited to sit in the board, because personally, the whole story with WGP resonates with me. Everything Dionne talked about, and the access to leadership by women in Africa, which we don't have that. We don't even have access to a narrative that women can actually lead, which is what WGEP does. So I'm very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about everything that has been addressed in Dionne's book. And I think it's a memoir, like, you know, the book says it's a memoir of love. And we work in remote and rural communities where not so many of the nonprofits operate. In Kenya, I think WGEP works is actually close to where I come from, and it's a very rural community in Kenya. And most of the NGOs don't want to go that deep because they want to do, you know, they work in very oversubscribed areas like Nairobi, Mombasa, and the cities in Kenya, because no one wants to go deep in the rural areas, but WGEP does that. And I'm very excited about seeing how this unfolds. And
ce programme m'a beaucoup aidé à renforcer mon engagement, ma détermination et ma conviction afin de réaliser mon rêve dans l'avenir. À travers les formations qu'on a eues dans le domaine de la communication, des enjeux prioritaires et de leadership.
Grâce à ce programme, aujourd'hui, je connais mes droits, j'ai eu des formations sur la communication, sur les enjeux prioritaires, et avec cette formation, je suis maintenant capable d'aider des filles et des femmes à se connaître mieux leurs droits sur la société.
Dans ma communauté, plus particulièrement à Karang, plusieurs enjeux me passionnent, mais en particulier l'éradication des violences. Parce que ces temps-ci, on constate qu'au Sénégal, il y a plusieurs violences. Les jeunes se violentent entre eux, les hommes, les femmes, tous se violentent entre eux. Bon, on est en train de travailler avec l'école, avec les professeurs, les camarades élèves, pour pouvoir éradiquer ce phénomène.
L'enjeu dans ma communauté qui me passionne le plus, c'est d'éradiquer les violences faites aux femmes et aux filles.
Moi, je veux lutter pour l'éradication de toute forme de violence faite aux femmes. Et je veux commencer par, dans ma famille, en aidant aux tâches ménagères, entre autres. Comme par exemple, dans ma famille, je vais commencer par aider ma maman à faire certaines tâches ménagères parce que je suis un gender sensitive. Et c'est pas parce qu'on est garçon qu'on ne peut pas faire certaines tâches. On doit et on a le pouvoir de faire certaines tâches. C'est pas parce qu'on est un garçon qu'on ne peut pas faire certaines choses.
Mes rêves, c'est de changer l'humanité. En fait, c'est de changer notre mode de vie, nos comportements et préserver la nature en plus.
Dans l'avenir, moi, je veux être ingénieur concepteur en informatique.
J'aimerais être une avocate pour servir mon pays, ma nation et surtout aider mon entourage.
And we would like you to support us. So if you're feeling inspired, you can sign up for our newsletters. You can also contribute directly through our website at womensglobal.org or send an email to Harriet, who is the Strategic Partnerships Manager, and learn about our program's growth. Or you can share information on what you've learned from Dionne and Sonya and the importance of girls' education and gender equality around the world. As a small organization, we rely on individuals like you to get word out there for our cause. So we are really calling on you to partner with us and become friends of WGEP.
Yes, I just want to reiterate Harriet's thank yous. Thank you, Dionne, Sonya, Damaris, Harriet, everybody who helped put this talk together. I feel like, Dionne, we could have spoken with you for another 2 or 3 hours. So if you're ever in Chicago, would love to get together for coffee or drinks. And,
let's do it. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you everyone so much for coming today's talk, and be on the lookout for more information about our work in the coming days. And the recording will be in the email. Thank you, and have a great afternoon and evening.